Hello, and welcome to the North Coast Journal Preview. This is a show where we take a look at what's coming to this week's edition of the North Coast Journal. I am your host, Tanya Shrum, and we are joined by North Coast Journal's news editor, Thad Greenson, and arts and features editor, Jennifer Fumiko Cahill. Welcome to you both.
Hey, Tanya.
Hey, another lovely May day.
Indeed.
Enjoy them while we get them.
All right. I could still use a little bit of rain before we're dry, but I'll keep that to myself.
Such a Humboldt girl.
Absolutely. Damp to the toes. Well, we're going to go over some wonderful stories this week. And first, Thad is going to bring us what's coming to this week's cover.
Yeah, Tanya, this week we have a really nice story from Paula Dent-Claw at Indian Country Today, who wrote about the Karuk tribes, cultural burning practice and program, and also a new first of its kind agreement reached with the state to allow it to resume.
I think this is a great idea. I mean, obviously, the original stewards of the land were getting much better results than we are in fire season.
Would definitely seem so. Yeah, it's a really nice story. It's I think we've talked before. It's rare that kind of an outside news entity comes into Humboldt County and reports on it well. But this is a really nice example, and Polly begins her story with a really nice anecdote of Bill Tripp, who is now the natural resources director at the Karuk tribe, from when he was a kid. He talks about kind of playing with fire in the wood burning stove at his grandma's home, and his grandma coming and being like, "Well, if you want to play with fire, like let's figure this out." And she gives him a box of matches and instructs him basically to burn a line in their yard, and figured that the weather was perfect for kind of a controlled burn. And this was his first experience with a controlled burn. And he says he used the entire box of matches, but got a full straight line burned, and that was kind of his introduction to cultural burning.
Yeah, and it really, the article contains so much information about the different not only the cultural significance, but how it's kind of ebbed and flowed over the years of the importance of prescribed burns, and then how it became illegal and deadly to those that practiced.
Yeah, that in 1850, actually, there's Article 10 of a law that was called the Government Protection of Indians Act, explicitly prohibited cultural burning. And so there's some other really neat anecdotes in the story about kind of these clandestine, secretive missions to do cultural burns. And I think it is Russell Atterbury, the chair of the Karuk tribe, talks about people would actually set timers to go off to set fires when they had an alibi, when they were back in town or something like that, but to do these kind of semi-controlled burns in prairies and other areas, because they recognize just the benefit to the landscape of these burns.
I think it was a wonderful part of the story where they talked about the Spanish settlers talking about how beautiful the land was. And they're like, yeah, because we've, manicured it over the years. And
right. Yeah, and so I mean, for the last 150 years, not only has California outlawed cultural burning, but it's also in the U.S. Forest Service has taken this suppression at all costs kind of policy toward wildfires. And so we've talked before about how due to that and the climate crisis that there's just this massive accumulation of fuel loads in the forest, which is why the intensity of these fires has just really risen exponentially in the last 10 or 15 years.
And so now the thought process is finally turned back to recognizing that this is something that needs to be looked at and implemented.
Hmm. Yeah, and the controlled burns have really gained a foothold in large part thanks to the work of a lot of people here on the North Coast, as a really important kind of fuel reduction strategy. And what was interesting just about this story is kind of the difference. One of the things interesting about the story is the difference between cultural burns and controlled burns. And then this really, carves this agreement between the Kirk tribe and the state really carves out a niche for the tribe to conduct these cultural burns as it sees fit without kind of coming to the state for permission, which is a big step.
Well, Thad, thank you for filling us in. Before we move on, do you have any final thoughts about this story?
Just again, I think that Polly Denkola did a fantastic job, and again, it's really just rare to see reporting on us done well, for kind of a national audience, and especially done well with a kind of a layered cultural sensitivity. And I felt like her reporting really did that. So just encourage folks to check it out.
Yeah, and I encourage everybody to pick up this week's journal and read the complete story. And with that, I'm going to turn to Jennifer, that also has a story that taught me some history about a very important building in Eureka.
Yes, Tanya, it is time for us to hit the club, the Eureka Women's Club. It's probably the only club I'm going to be hitting. So I got to talk to some very interesting ladies over there. Side note, the Eureka Women's Club actually allows men there. So quit your crying, Thad. You can also join. Um, but I spoke to them because they are having an event this week on Saturday that is a little different for them. The Eureka Women's Club does a lot of community service stuff, a lot of fundraising. They've done a lot of work in the way of helping folks with food insecurity, with homelessness, with social services, and all the kinds of nonprofits that we have locally, like Food for People, those organizations, as well as high school music programs and things like that. And they've raised money to give to these different organizations, these nonprofits that, as we know, are in a tough way right now, and it's only getting tougher as we go on. And those kinds of organizations that bridge gaps and really help people. So they've been involved in doing this since 1901, when they were the Monday Club. How many clubs are still going since 1901? I mean, come on. We've all been in a book club that imploded. Come on. So the Eureka Women's Club is having an event this weekend that is to help them renovate the kitchen that they use to raise funds for other things. It is a space that gets rented out for weddings, events, etc., parties, and including piano recitals, which I will get to later. And so they need a good working kitchen. This one was put in the 1950s and last renovated probably somewhere around the 1970s. So it needs a little help. So they're raising money for that, as they've been doing with some Friday night food to go events. But they're doing a 4-course meal on Saturday. And who is in the kitchen but Wendy Chan, hey girl, and Louise Zuliger. You may know Louise Zuliger from Louise Zuliger Confections. If you see a beautiful glossy chocolate dome with hazelnut cream inside of it anywhere around town, that was probably Louise Zuliger. She does beautiful, beautiful work. I've eaten it. It's fantastic. Those two will be in the kitchen putting together this massive Chinese-inspired meal. And the S Club from St. Bernard's Academy, which is kind of like Seroptimus, but for the youngs, is going to be serving, doing table service. There's going to be live music and dancing. The music will be from Young and Lovely. Hey, Young and Lovely. And so it's sort of a jazzy, kind of contemporary take on jazz standards, and very danceable, very lovely evening out. And the tickets are $75, which is a big leap for, and kind of a risk for, the Eureka Women's Club, since they usually do, to-go meals and other kinds of fundraisers that are a lot lower ticket. But they're taking a risk to try and do something because they need to renovate this kitchen. I got to talk to a couple folks from down there, including Merlene Georgeson, who is the second vice president of the club. And she is also the daughter-in-law of Franklin Georgeson, who was the architect who built the Eureka Women's Club. You've driven past it on J Street. It's really right up against the sidewalk. There's no real front yard to speak of. And it is a craftsman style hall. It's made of old growth redwood. The stage, I believe, is all maple, but inside the walls and everything are redwood. It's one of those lovely old buildings that you don't, we don't build them like that anymore. And in fact, when they built it, starting in 1916 and finishing in 1917, it only cost like $3,000. Yeah. Everybody look at your mortgage or your rent and just feel it, experience it, and then let it go. So, and how they saved money in order to build that was another story. They bought the plot of land and then they allowed a farmer to graze his cow on it for something like $1.50 a month. That and a bunch of other fundraisers brought them to the $3 grand with which they could commission the building. So after that, they built this thing, and you might have seen Georgeson's name elsewhere around the county. The old Creamery building was one of his. There are a bunch of private homes, beautiful craftsman style homes, some local churches, and the Minor Theater was one of his designs. So it's a historic building. It's part of the character of the county, and they are trying to renovate it, bring it back, and maintain it. Part of what they raise money for is maintaining the building and for other charities and nonprofits and things like that. I was interested in the fact that the members choose which nonprofits sort of like, by discussion, and they vote on things, and it might alternate, which is why they cover so many different aspects of life, social services, music, arts, everything like that. I spoke to Carol Crossley, who joined the club a few years ago, and she said that she first used to come to the Eureka Women's Club when she was a kid, and her first piano recital was on the Steinway that's still on the stage when she was 7.
That's
Sister,
amazing.
I know, right? Her sister got married there, and even Merlene Georgeson told me that she actually rented out the women's club for her husband's memorial after he passed. And that was the moment when she looked around and thought, this place should not disappear. And I'm going to try and help save it. And that's when she joined the women's club. It's really interesting to me. So anyway, that is happening this weekend. And it's just an interesting little moment of using the kitchen to fix the kitchen so that they can use the kitchen to help more folks in our community. So,
And if folks are feeling generous and ready to shake a tail feather, how can they obtain entry to the event?
you can go to womensclub.org, or there's a phone number that's in the paper and you can check it out. I'm not sure how many tickets are left at this point, but you should definitely give it a shot. How many times are you going to get a 4-course Wendy Chan, Louise Zuliger meal? Maybe not so often. Get it while you can.
And it's a beautiful building, so I encourage folks to participate if they can. Well, with that, we're gonna go back and cover some news with Thad. Thad, do you want to start with the article by Aaron Donaldson?
Oh,
Donaldson?
yes, absolutely. We have a wonderful views piece in this week's paper by Aaron Donaldson, who's a lecturer at Cal Poly Humboldt. And folks might remember Aaron. He was featured in a story that I wrote at the beginning of the school year, back in August, I believe, a segregated campus that dealt with or looked at various access issues on Cal Poly Humboldt campus. Spoiler, there are many of them, and they have been there for a long, long time, much to a number of people's frustration, including Aaron's. Aaron joined. I've been talking to Aaron since we ran that story about kind of some progress of accessibility improvements on campus, and not a whole lot of them coming quickly. And I'd encouraged him to write a views piece and kind of saying that I thought it would be important for readers to hear kind of directly from him. And so this is the first of a three-part series. I should have said he's a lecturer in the communications department who also used to lead Humboldt State University's debate team back when that was a thing. And so he was very interested in the rhetoric of these disability conversations, specifically the rhetoric of ableism. And so that's really the focus of this piece, which is the first in what's going to be a three-part series. So I'm really excited to get that out to folks.
And so the first article kind of was well done, comparing his situation to a student that he was observing waiting for a shuttle.
Yeah, he kind of starts off the piece talking about waiting at Founders Hall, which is at the top of the Cal Poly Humboldt campus, and talking to a student who had I think broken a foot or maybe sprained an ankle, who was on kind of temporarily on crutches and waiting for, like you said, waiting for the shuttle. And one of the things that the points he makes in this first piece is that there are a lot of issues that folks just really don't realize until they come to the point where they have some mobility challenges, which he also makes point being able-bodied is a temporary condition, and all of us at some point in our lives are very, very likely to face mobility issues. Another point he makes is just that these are issues that many of us just kind of walk by and somehow feel comfortable ignoring, where we would not feel comfortable ignoring other access and equity issues. I think he makes that point really, really strongly in the piece.
And it's true. I mean, or when you have a loved one that you're assisting getting around places, you become quite aware of the lack of access for folks that are disabled. And I'm glad that this three-part series will dive into more of those issues, because obviously the Cal Poly campus is beautiful, but there are ways to make it more accessible for the entire community.
Absolutely, and that's it's a thing that Aaron and Professor James Graham that I spoke to for the previous story really pointed out. Is that it's just there are lots of ways to address access issues, and to say, oh, it's back when it was Humboldt State University, oh, it's Hills and Stairs University, it's the geography, the topography is just not accurate. Ramps just work just as well as stairs, and there isn't a building that can't be outfitted with them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that reporting from your original article and Aaron Donaldson's.
Yeah. Real quick before we pivot, I would just be remiss to say not to say that Aaron is also an Access Humboldt board member and a regular on the Redwood Wonk show. So he should be well known to Access Humboldt audiences.
And if you're not checking out Redwood Wonk, what are you doing?
Indeed.
And with that, we also have a news story from our editor, Thad, that elusive Thaddeus. And this is on the ongoing struggle with the St. Joseph's lawsuit.
Yeah, so we broke some news last week that kind of some very highly anticipated news that Judge Timothy Canning had issued a ruling on St. Joseph's Providence and St. Joseph Hospital's motion to dismiss the lawsuit brought by the California Attorney General's office, alleging that the hospital had violated the emergency services law in California when it denied an emergency abortion procedure that a doctor deemed medically necessary for a patient there back in February of 2024. So this lawsuit was filed toward the end of 2024. We've written a ton about it, and came to a hearing a few months ago on this motion. And basically, Providence's attorneys made a number of arguments. The most central one is that this is a First Amendment freedom of religion issue, and that the state cannot tell the hospital to perform procedures that are against its religious doctrines. Now, this is a motion to dismiss, so it is really just saying that the complaint itself doesn't have a solid grounding in the law. And so at this stage in the proceeding, the judge is kind of supposed to assume that the facts alleged in the complaint are true, and then just see whether the law applies. And he ruled very decisively on all fronts that the lawsuit is soundly filed under the law and should proceed to the next phase, which will ultimately be a trial and a contention of facts in some cases.
Excellent. And if folks are unaware of this case, I think you do a great job of bringing everybody up to speed as you go over the updates in this case.
I appreciate that. It's it's important for us. Whenever you're kind of writing on an ongoing issue, you always want to write it as though somebody who hasn't been following the whole situation can step in and read an article and and be brought up to speed, as you said. One of the things we feel like is really important too is just to try to explain the law and kind of the nuances of some of the legal arguments. And so the emergency services law is really, and Judge Canning goes into this in his ruling, but is really designed to ensure kind of equal access to emergency care for everybody in California. And so that if you show up at a hospital, regardless of your ability to pay or anything else specific to you, the hospital, if it can provide the services you need, has an obligation to under the law, is the basic premise. And so it was interesting to kind of see how Judge Canning applied that law to some of the arguments that Providence's attorneys made. And one of them, one of the arguments that Providence made is that they transferred Anna Nosluck, the woman who was pregnant, to Mad River Community Hospital, and that they transferred her there for a medical reason to get the abortive procedure that she needed. And the AG's office countered that that was a non-medical transfer. So they transferred her there not because she could only receive that care at Mad River, and that St. Joe's was unable to provide that care, but that St. Joseph was choosing not to provide that care. And they're saying kind of that the medical transfer provisions of the law are in place for hospitals that don't have the equipment or don't have the trained personnel to do a certain type of procedure. And in this case, they're saying, essentially they just elected not to do a procedure. They had every tool and and all the training to do. And Judge Canning kind of says, well, if we allow this type of transfer, then it's essentially negating the purpose of the law. At this time, the religious policy is about abortion procedures, but there could be a different hospital with a religious policy about treating the indigent who can't pay for procedures. And so he's kind of saying it negates the equal access provisions that this law was designed to ensure.
Absolutely. And on the AG side, they're saying that basically boils down to discriminating against somebody based on their reproductive status of being a woman, per se.
Yeah. And it's also, I think it's important to note that there's, at least at this point in the proceedings, there's been no dispute about Ms. Nosluck's pregnancy being viable. She was 15 weeks pregnant with twins when her water broke. And according to both the AG's lawsuit and Providence's response, is that there's no contention that this was a non-viable pregnancy. And essentially what Providence, the stance that Providence was saying is that, we'll treat people when their life is, we'll perform abortive procedures when the mother's life is in jeopardy. Her life just wasn't in that much jeopardy yet. I'm obviously summarizing the argument, but that's very much, it seems, the stance that they're taking. And that if she had stayed there and deteriorated further, it probably would have gotten to a point where they would have felt this was a quote unquote medically necessary procedure and done it. But because it was a bit earlier in the process, they felt like it was elective.
Well, and I know you make reference to other Jane Does that are also bringing similar suits, and I hope that you'll continue to keep us up to date as this moves forward in the courts.
Yeah, absolutely. There's two other kind of parallel lawsuits with very similar allegations that are moving forward through the system right now.
All right. Well, thank you again, Thad. I know this is difficult reporting, but very necessary. And that wraps up our time for this week. The current edition of the North Coast Journal will be on The current edition of the North Coast Journal will be available on newsstands tomorrow. Or, of course, you can find it online at northcoastjournal.com. Thank you for being with us today and every week. My name is Tanya Shrum, and thank you for staying supportive and informed here at our North Coast community.